Okay. Hello. Looks like we got a few people on already. If I sit back, it's better. If I sit forward, I catch the light from the window, and the sun's just setting. No, we got exactly 5 minutes to go. Greetings. Are you getting some spring weather? Yes. Yeah, it has. It has warmed up considerably. We did get a dump of snow yesterday, but it's wet, sloppy kind of snow. Not very serious. Not very much either, really. But we have had temperatures in the daytime up above 10 degrees, so that's nice. Good evening. Good evening. We'll start at 6 o'clock as usual. Still a few minutes to go. No, greetings from Portugal. That's nice. I like how this gets international listeners. I don't know what that is. Greetings from Wales. Northern Europe. It's a little vague. Oh, Marcel. Finland. Yes, good. This area I'm living in is this corner of northwestern Ontario is full of Finnish people.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, so we're continuing on with the Abhidhamma series, and I think after this session there may be two more. What I want to talk about today is the kalapa model of physical matter. This is an atomic model. It seems it was fairly common in ancient civilizations with a strong philosophical bent, like the Greeks and the Indians, to eventually come across some idea of an atomic structure of matter. And the version that we have in the Abhidhamma is actually a fairly late development. It's not found as such in the canonical Abhidhamma books, much less in the suttas. There is some ambiguous sort of passages that might indicate an atomic idea, but it wasn't developed. We spoke last time about the four great elements as the principal constituents of matter, and they were seen more as forces or qualities than as substantial things. But with the passage of time and the further development of the Abhidhamma thinking in the commentaries, there, which was always tending to want to develop more precision and more detail, the nature of matter became elucidated in terms of a theory of what are called kalapas, which are roughly translated, we could say they're atoms. They're the smallest physical components of material existence. And there was, it seems, quite a lot of discussion and debate between the early Buddhist schools as to the exact nature of matter. Even when they generally agreed on its atomic structure, there was a lot of controversy about the details. For example, maybe the most important controversy was between the Sarvastivadis and others schools and the Theravada and a few other schools in two camps as to the size of the kalapas. In the Sarvastivadin model, the kalapas were infinitesimals, meaning that they have no extension. They're like mathematical points. They have a location in space, but they have no dimensions. The Theravada Abhidhamma proposed the kalapas did have a very small actual dimension in space. And one of the commentaries calculates this and gives a number. And the way these kind of really small or really big numbers are often expressed in Indian texts was by a series of multipliers. They would say that so many kalapas, let's say 7 kalapas makes one anu kalapa, and then 7 of these makes 10 of something else, and or makes 1 of something else, and then 10 of those makes 1 of something else, and they keep multiplying it that way until the very last step brings you to an angula, which is a finger length, or for all practical purposes, an inch. So the converted into modern terms, the size of a kalapa. No, I'm just looking. I've got it here. I'm just. I don't want to. I don't want to quote the wrong number. Here we go. The size of a kalapa is 0.04 nanometers. Converting it into modern terminology, which is a kind of an interesting. In that the modern scientific measure for the size of a hydrogen atom is 0.1 nanometers. So the kalapa, as calculated by the ancient Abhidhamma, was just a bit less than half of what modern science sees as the size of the smallest atom, which is really kind of interesting that they came so close, that it's within the same order of magnitude. They're comparable. But in any case, the idea was that they were very, very small, beyond the range of our senses. Now, both of these viewpoints, that kalapas are very small or that kalapas have no size, both of them have logical problems in the to stay within the logical confines of the broader Abhidhamma system. If they have no dimensions, then it's not conceivable how they could make larger bodies. And if they do have dimensions, then it's inconceivable how they could be ultimately true atoms, meaning without parts. Because if you have something that has dimensions, then it obviously has a top side and a bottom side, a left side and a right side. And these kind of points were debated considerably. One of the responses to this was the Yogacara, the school that denied the reality of matter altogether and said everything is mind. And they took the logical inconsistencies of every possible atomic model as proof that matter is not real. It's only a mental conception, because it's actually illogical that matter could even exist. So there was a lot of deep thinking about these questions. This was long before anybody tried like experimental science. This was all done on the speculative level. But sticking with the Theravada model of the kalapa, the kalapa is the smallest unit of actual physical matter, but it is actually composed of other units. Just as when we looked at the mind, the chitta never arises by itself, but always with a suite of jatasakas attached to it. There's always mental associates arising with the chitta. The chitta doesn't arise ever singular and naked. It always has all these associated states. So it is with matter. The individual dhammas, which are even a finer grain than kalapas, there are always at least 8 composing a kalapa. And these are the 4 great primaries, that is earth, air, fire, and water, plus color, taste, odor, and nutritive essence. And these are called the secondaries. and they arise dependent on the four great primaries. They don't have any independent existence. Now these eight always arise together in every instance of matter, and they are not separated in space. They all arise in the same location. So in one location of space is defined by a kalapa, and in the Theravada model, it has a dimension, but it's very, very minutely small. But these eight dhammas all arise together at the same location. So they're, even in this atomic model, they're actually these dhammas, the actual constituent dhammas of matter are seen more as qualities or properties than as physical objects. The kalapa is the smallest possible physical object. And all in inert matter, the matter composing rocks and water in the sea and so on, non-living matter is composed just of these eight. Matter in living beings, which is always more of an interest to the Abhidhamma than external non-living things. The matter in living beings is more complex. Added to these eight, which in English it's often called in English Abhidhamma books as the octad, or the eight. You have additional factors that come into play. For example, you have the life faculty. And we talked about some of these factors previously. And these are dependent dhammas. Some of them are nominal dhammas that don't have any actual existence, but flavor or color the other dhammas. So we have life faculty, the masculinity faculty, the femininity faculty, bodily and verbal intimation, which means that when a living organism, like a human being, takes some action by moving the body or by speaking, then that dhamma is present and is added to the eight. So we have combinations of 8, 9, 10, or 11, in some cases 12 dhammas that arise together in one kalapa. And all these more complex kalapas are present only in living beings. In inert matter, there arises only the eight, and it's always the eight. And the difference between different substances, like the difference between rock and water, is not a difference in the quantity of the dhammas or the kalapas, but in their intensity. So the earth element is more intense in a piece of rock, and the water element is more intense in actual water. But all eight are present in each instance of matter. And these kalapas, whether they're in living or non-living, as we said, they're minutely small, and they never touch one another. They're separated in space, but the intervening space is said to be smaller even than a kalapa. So they're very close, but they never quite touch. They also exist only momentarily. And this in Theravada, this moment was seen as an actual time interval, but very, very small. We have a similar thing in modern physics called the Planck interval, which is the smallest possible unit of time that can't be further subdivided. So that time is seen as essentially quantum or digital. It's not an analog or smooth progression. There's discrete moments, and this was the view held by the Theravada Abhidhamma as well, that the Dhammas only exist for a moment. So the Dhammas constituting a kalapa, they all come into existence together, and they pass out of existence together after a very infinitesimally small moment of time. And during that moment of time, they don't move or change. They just come into existence as they are. So the concept of physical motion, and whether of a living being or of an inert object, is not anything more than an illusion at the macroscopic level. There is no really such thing as motion. What there is the arising of dhammas subsequently in adjacent locations. A dhamma comes into existence only for a moment at one point in space, and it can serve as one of the causal factors for a subsequent dhamma that arises at a slightly different adjacent location, and the end result is the appearance of motion. There's also a classification of matter in terms of the originating factor. Some matter arises from kama, some from consciousness, some from heat, and some from nutriment. So those kalapas or physical objects that arise from kama include the sense organs. And if you'll recall, the Abhidhamma theory of the sense organs is that they are special physical matter, very much smaller than the visible organs, which generally corresponds to modern science. Like we have the eye is a fairly large, complex structure, but it's only really the rods and cones in the retina that are sensitive, that receive the light image. So and the Abhidhamma version of that is that there is at the back of the eye very minute, sensitive matter, and these arise from kama. So it's because of kama you have sense organs. You're born in this human form that has 5 sense organs that are sensitive to a certain range of data. Other types of animals have different ranges of senses, like dogs can hear high-pitched sounds, and that's because of their kama being reborn in the dog body. They have different sense organs. Matter arising from consciousness is mainly the motion of the intimation, meaning the deliberate physical movement of the body, and also verbal expression. So that creates a form of matter that arises from consciousness. Nutriment is the factor that continues the physical form of the body, that the body throughout life is sustained by nutriment. So the physical form is caused by taking in of food, which just makes kind of common sense. We're built up of what we consume. Our physical form is. And the last is the those categories of matter caused by utu, which is temperature, but also more broadly is like climate or physical causes. And that includes all non-living matter and some particular instances of living matter. The physical qualities of that constitute health. We talked about these last time. The three factors of lightness, workability, and malleability, which together always occur in some combination together, and they represent physical health and well-being. And if they're strong, you're healthy. If they're weak or defective, then you're sick. And those arise by a combination of nutriment, temperature, and consciousness. So uh, physical matter arises from all these various kinds of causes. And we always make a distinction between the physical matter in a living being and physical matter in the abstract, like in non living things. So this is somewhat different than theories of matter that arose in the West, like from the Greeks onwards, where it was um, approached from a more abstract point of view, and no great distinction was made between the matter of a living body and physical matter of the universe, which to a large degree that's dependent on the different orientations of these civilizations. I think the Greeks tended to be more extroverted and the Indians more introverted. And the Buddhist thought, even going back to the Buddha himself, was always interested in the practical question of liberation, of the soteriological question. How can we make an end of this suffering? So theories, abstract theories about the nature of matter are of less interest to this mindset than how the aggregate of body is composed. What are we talking about with the aggregate of body? So as the Abhidhamma as a whole divides the organism into chitta, chittasika, and rupa. So we in looking at rupa, we're looking at this khandha of the physical form, which is also one of the four satipatthanas, contemplation of the body. So the Abhidhamma approach was basically an intellectualization of that contemplation of the body, the contemplation of the body at this kind of a level. And this, as I said, this atomic theory tended to be a late development. We have in the uh, different layers or phases. In the suttas, there is talk of the four elements without a lot of definition. Um, one of the Satipatthana contemplations of the body is the contemplation of the four elements. So again, a practical spiritual development or meditational aspect of this. The commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta has a very interesting meditation practice to do with the four elements, and that's done with walking meditation. A lot of people really like this meditation. I've given it on retreats, and people really seem to get a lot out of it. It's you break your stride into four components. When you lift the foot from the floor, that's fire element. Then you move the foot forward through space, that's air element. Then you settle the foot down, that's water element. And then for a moment you press the foot into the earth, that's earth element. So you're going from the most energetic element down to the most tranquil element, and you're going through that cycle again and again with each stride, just contemplating the quality of that element in the walking. The four elements also occur in the cosmological model as at least three of them do as agents of the destruction of the world system at the end of a cycle. The world can be destroyed by fire when everything burns up, or it can be destroyed by water when everything is submerged and drowned, or it can be destroyed by air when a huge wind pulverizes everything. And there is one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya that goes into this somewhat, talks about disturbances in the elements and mentions um, when the elements get out of control and become excessive. Then in the canonical Abhidhamma, the four elements are defined more precisely, and we also have mention of the other factors like the secondary dhammas, secondary material dhammas, but there's not yet a developed atomic theory. They're definitely seen as kind of qualities that pervade matter. And it was in the development of the commentaries that the nature of matter was examined at a finer and finer grain and ended up with this atomic theory of kalapas, each composed of at least 8 dhammas. So to summarize, in the Theravada model, we have kalapas of a very minute size, but of a definite dimension. It's a small but actual finite size, separated slightly in space, and each kalapa is composed of at least 8 dhammas, and these are not separated in space from each other. They all occupy the same location. So it's not really right to think of them as separate objects. They're qualities that or energies that compose a single object. The smallest object is the kalapa. And in inert or non-living matter, it's these 8, the 4 great elements, plus color, taste, smell, and nutritive essence, which mostly serve as, we might say, hooks for the sense organs of beings. And in living beings, there's a more complex variety of kalapas, because to the basic 8 can be added additional dhammas, up to 12. And these compose the structure of living beings. And matter can arise from either kama, consciousness, nutriment, or temperature. And non-living matter is always considered to arise from temperature. Well, utu, temperature, should be interpreted somewhat more broadly than just thermometer temperature. It's like natural force, or the energy of the natural world. So that concludes a summary examination of the Abhidhamma theory of matter. and I'll stop there. And next week we'll look at a bit more at the idea of Dhamma as a momentary occurrence and the idea of time in the Abhidhamma conception. So I'll stop there and see if anybody wants to continue discussion with some questions. Okay, we've got something here. Does the notion of partless particle require the notion of emptiness, or is anatta sufficient to account for it? Yeah, how this relates to sunya or emptiness. It's a part of the Abhidhamma view that these dhammas are themselves essentially empty of substance, and this was something that was approached from. We have to back up a little bit and see how things were considered outside of Buddhism in India. That there was the idea of any unit of matter, whether it was an atomic theory or otherwise, had substance and quality. And this was also a view that was held in the West by Aristotle and other thinkers, that there's a substance and the substance has qualities, whereas the Abhidhamma says, no, there's no substance. There are qualities, but there's no bearers of qualities. So we have these kalapas composed of 8 dhammas, and the dhammas themselves are not born by anything. There's no primary substance that holds earth, air, fire, water. There's just these qualities of earth, air, fire, water, and their combination creates what we perceive at a macroscopic level as a substance, but it's not actually a substance. It's just an interplay of forces. So emptiness is part of the system. Of course, this was somewhat attacked later in the Mahayana, and particularly by the Madhyamaka, as the Abhidharma models. They saw them as kind of missing the point of emptiness. But I think if you actually get into the way the Abhidhamma texts describe matter, there's no contradiction from emptiness. Okay, now there's a whole bunch. I got to scroll back and forth on this chat to catch this stuff. There's a whole bunch of other. Oh, it's one long question over several posts. Okay, I'll read it out. Vajrayana seems to stray somewhat from original Buddha Dharma, incorporating various eschatological and messianic beliefs that you find in Judeo-Christianity. For example, they seem to stress expedient means, more stress to the energetic or blissful effects of the practice, at the behest of building a strong foundation, almost as if driven by Dharma ending age induced anxiety rather than compassion. Can you comment on the Vajrayana school from your Theravada perspective? Also, according to Theravada, when is Maitreya supposed to come? Also, I heard you mention that he will be accompanied by a will-turning monarch. In what sutta is this mentioned? Vajrayana, from my Theravada perspective, since this is a late development in India, then it got into Tibet, and it does add quite a bit to the original Buddhist teachings, and particularly the big. I mean, there's all sorts of details in where they differ, but the really, I think the crux of it is in the bodhisattva idea, which kind of changes the point of the practice. In the Theravada, a bodhisattva is the Pali equivalent of bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a being who's on his way to Buddhahood. So when in the text, whenever in the Jataka stories, for example, or in the stories of the life of Gautama Buddha, before his enlightenment, he's always referred to as the bodhisattva. And there was such a thing as a bodhisattva vow. This was a vow taken to accomplish Buddhahood, which means that you couldn't, which was considered a very much more difficult path, and would take many, many hundreds of lifetimes. And during that time, you couldn't reach stream entry, because if you did, you'd only have 7 lifetimes left. You'd cut your bodhisattva career off. And the bodhisattva vow in Theravada also is only considered real or binding when it was taken before a living Buddha, in the presence of a living Buddha, and then the living Buddha would recognize and bless you and say, yes, this one will become a Buddha in such and such a of such and such a clan, such and such a name, and so on. Now this is changed in Mahayana and then later Vajrayana into the idea of the bodhisattva vow, which is not to leave samsara until all sentient beings are liberated, which they take as an expression of great compassion. So one who takes this vow says, I'm not going to liberate myself and leave the rest of you to thrash around in samsara. I'm going to stick around as I develop spiritually. I won't ever leave. I'll just continue to help beings. So there's criticism from both sides of these different eschatological or soteriological models. From the Mahayana side, they look at the Theravada view and they call us Hinayana, and they say we're narrow and selfish. We just want to become arahants and get out of here. We're just thinking of ourselves. But from the Theravada view, looking at Mahayana, we say, well, it looks to me sort of suspicious. You say it's compassion, but it could be attachment to being. You just, you kind of like the idea of keep coming back. You don't want to make an end. You're not making a complete renunciation. Oh. So there definitely is a huge difference. The last part of that question was about Maitreya. In Pali, it's Metteyya. In Sanskrit, it's Maitreya. There's no date as to when he's supposed to come back, but it won't be soon, because the new Buddha only appears when the teachings of the old Buddha before are completely forgotten in the world. Then there's a dark period when no Buddha teachings are remembered. And after some time, then a new Buddha will arise. And this coming Buddha will be the last one of this world age. And it is stated in the text that at the same time as his arising, there will also be a will-turning monarch. And this is found in a sutta in the Digha Nikaya, which I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's Dhammachakka something. It's the wheel-turning. It's a sutta about wheel-turning monarchs, and it mentions the Bodhisattva. It's the sutta before the Aganya Sutta. Let's see. Is it possible to see a kalapa during deep vipassana meditation? I would say not, but I know there are some Burmese teachers who say that you can. I'm not sure if they're interpreting kalapa somewhat differently from the strict Abhidhamma definition or not. If I understand correctly, chitta does not exist without chittasakas. How about awareness? Does it require anything else to exist? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by awareness. That awareness is chitta. I don't see that as different. You'd have to define that. I know this is a problem. I like to avoid trying to use these English words for these kind of states because they're not precise. I'm not sure what you mean as awareness is something different from chitta. Note the limitation within the senses of mankind, the visible spectrum, a limitation of the intellect to invent a means of empirical measurement. What are your thoughts on dark matter and energy? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, um, I don't know if it's even ever been proved that there is such a thing as dark matter. Uh, it would seem to be a um, kind of necessary kludge to make the math work. I'm not sure if it actually exists or not. Maybe. I did mention a speculation in my book about maybe all the kind of mythical realms that we talk about, like Mount Sineru and the four continents. Maybe they all exist on at the level of dark matter, but that's just like a wild speculation. I wouldn't put any stock in it. Oh, Matthias, greetings. I heard you got a lot of snow there in Germany this year. Are there examples of possible objects of Bawanga somewhere? Yeah, in the Visuddhimagga, there's some examples given, just very few, um, and they're kind of more extreme cases. Like if someone, uh, when they're dying, if they're going to go to hell, they'll see flames and swords, and that becomes their Bawanga object. And if they're going to heaven, they might see beautiful flowers and a garden or something, and that becomes the Bawanga object. But there's no real. I've never seen any kind of comprehensive discussion of possible Bawanga objects. Yeah, yeah. Matthias is telling me that they had snow for 2 weeks. We actually got here in Thunder Bay area. We got very little snow this year. It was super cold for a while, but it's been one of the driest winters I can remember. Okay, it seems to be winding down. I'm not seeing any fresh questions. Last chance if anybody wants to pop in a question, or else I'll sign off. Okay. Okay. So see you next week. Thank you all for coming. I hope it was of some interest.